Hey guys, this is Afik. In the last episode, we've set up jwt authentication, and we've managed to log in to our Backend API using Postman. We've set up this route. We're going to /API/auth/login, and once we post to this route with our email and password, we get back an object containing the access token, the user, and token type, and also when this token is expired. What we're going to do now is create a login function inside our project and create a login page, and we'll try to put our email and password and make sure we can log in. Okay, so inside our JS folder, we'll create a new one and we'll call it helpers, and I'll create a new file here called auth.js. Okay, let's create a new function called login. This function will get the user credentials, and we're also going to return a new promise. So once the user is authenticated, we can resolve with the authenticated user. So resolve reject. We're going to use Axios, and we'll post the same endpoint. Will be API auth login, and we're going to use those credentials in here. Once this call is resolved, we know that we have an authenticated user, and all we need to do now is resolve with this response data. If our data is not correct, and if we have entered the wrong username and password, we can just for now reject with something like wrong email or password. This is temporary. I'm going to change it later. I'll create another function here to fetch the user from our local storage. The reason I'm going to create this function is because for now we have inside the response.data we have the authenticated user, but we're not saving it anywhere, and once we refresh the page we lost the user and we have to do a post to log in again to get the authenticated user again. So what we're going to do is take this user, stringify it, and put it inside our local storage. And then once we refresh the page, we check if we have this key in our local storage, and we can take it out and set it as our current user, and we don't have to log in again. Okay, so let's do export function get local user. This function will get nothing, and we'll create a const here user string, and it will be local storage dot get item user. Now if we don't have a user, let's just return null. Return null. If we do have a user, we can return json.parse user string, because all the values we have in our local storage are saved as strings, and we cannot use string as our local user. Then we have to parse it to get the actual object from it. Okay, next let's create another folder in here, and let's call this one auth, and create a component called login. So login.view. This component will also have template, a script, and styles. Inside our template, let's do div with a class of login, row, and let's put it in the middle, so we do justify content center. Let's do something like call medium 4 and create a card, and the card header will be login. In our card body we're going to have a form. This form is going to contain the email, password, and the submit button for our login form. So let's do just the bootstrap way of creating inputs. So let's do form group row. We'll have a label for email. And we'll have an input type email. We'll set up a V model to bind this data into our components data. So export default. We'll give it a name of login. We're going to have data. It's going to be a function that returns an object. This object will have our form data. So let's do form. We'll have email and password. Okay, so the V model in here is going to be form.email. Give it a class of form control placeholder for email address. Okay, let's do another one for the password. And finally, we need another input for our submit button. We don't need a label. And this is going to be input type submit. And the value will be login. Okay, let's create our authentication method. So methods, we're going to have one called authenticate. And the first thing we're going to do in this function is this store dispatch. And I would like to dispatch an action to our store saying that we are initiating the login sequence and we would like to be in a loading state. And once we are completed with the login and we have an authenticated user or an error, we can dispatch another action called login success or login failed. So the first action is going to be login with no arguments. Next, we'd like to use the login function we've made in our helpers. So let's import this one. I'll do import login from, let's go up to components and up to JS and into helpers and auth. We're going to do login. We're going to send our credentials. So in this case, it's this.data.form. So it's going to be just this object in here. And once this is resolved, we're going to get the response back. And now we can dispatch another action to our store saying the login is succeeded, and we have data to pass into our store so we can save the current authenticated user. This.store.commit. We're about to trigger a mutation in our store saying I would like to change a value. In this case, I would like to change the loading state to false and also the authenticated user. So let's do login success and we're going to send in the response. Then I would like to use our router to navigate to our homepage. So router.push, and let's go into the path of slash. This is our homepage. Now, if for some reason we have an error, we're going to get this error now. And if you remember, inside our helpers auth, we are rejected with this error message for now. So what we're going to do is let's do an error in here, and initially this value is going to be null, and I'm going to do this dot store dot commit. This is going to be login failed, and let's send over the error. Okay, now let's go into our store and make sure we have all those variables set up. Okay, so the first key we need is current user. Now, what we put in here, this is going to be the initial value of the store. So once you refresh the page, and all the state you put in here, let's say I put an empty object. So the initial state of the current user is going to be empty object until something else is going to be overriding it. So in our case, I would like to first make sure that I don't have user in my local storage. So I'm going to do user is going to be equal to get local user. This is the function I've made earlier inside our auth. And as you can see, VS Code is already imported this function for me. And my current user is going to be this one. And if you remember, we've set up the default for this one to be null. So if you don't have a user, the current user is going to be null. And let's do another key called is logged in. And this one is going to be just in case we have a user, it's logged in. And if not, we're going to get false in here. I'm doing double explanation marks because I'm going to cast it into a Boolean. Next, let's do one for loading, and it's initially going to be false. And auth error, if we have one for some reason, this is going to be null. And we're going to have a list of customers. That's going to be for later, but this is all the state we're going to need for this application. Okay, now next, inside our getters, I would like to set up some functions in here so I can call them inside my Vue components to get keys from the store. Now those getters are always getting updated, so once I commit a mutation to my store and I'm going to change something in my local state, not in the local state, in the Vuex state, and this is the store state, then I'm going to get fresh data from our getters if we are going to use one of them inside the component. So let's do one for is loading. This is going to be a function that get a state, and I'm going to simply return state.loading. Let's do one more for is logged in, and it's going to return this value. Another one for the current user. Do the same for auth error. And finally, let's do one for customers. Well, you don't have to do this this way. I just like to use getters. You can just inside your Vue component, you can do this dot store dot state dot something. Okay, but you want to use getters because those are computed values, and you'll get fresh data once some mutation happens inside your store. Okay, next let's create our mutations. In our mutations, this is every time you do a commit inside your Vue component, you will trigger a mutation in the store. So our first mutation, let's call this one login, and you will get the state, and I'll do state dot loading equals true, and state dot auth error, just in case we have something in there, I'm going to send it back to null. I'll create another one for login success, and we have to make sure this is the same name we have inside our login component. So let's see, okay, login success, and here we're going to do login failed. Let's go back into our store, and on login success, you can see in our login component that we're going to pass in the response data, which is our authenticated user. So I'm going to get here a state and a payload, and I'm going to do state.auth error is going to be null, state.isLoggedIn is true, loading is false, and the current user is going to be, well, here's the thing. Okay, I'm going to get a user from the backend and also an authentication token. And if you remember from our Postman example, we get one key for access token and another one for the user. But I would like to store only one key in my local storage, so I'm going to assign both of them to the same object. I'm going to have an object called user, and inside my user, I'll have the access token. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is object.assign. I'll create a new object. Okay, so the first object I'm going to assign to this current user object is going to be payload.user, and the second is going to be an object with the key token, and the value is payload.access token. Next, I would like to store this user inside my local storage. So local storage dot set item, and the key is going to be called user, and the value will be json dot stringify this state dot current user. And this is going to be this object, an object with the user, and inside the user we're going to have a key of token. Okay, great. Let's create another one just in case we have a failed login. This is going to be this one. So login failed. We'll get a state, and I'm going to change the loading to false and the authentication error to be what we got inside. I think we have a payload. Yes, this payload is the error we got from once we try to authenticate the user with our backend API. So we'll get also a payload in here, and we'll have loading to false, and the authentication error is going to be this payload, payload.error. Okay, next we need another function for logout. This is going to be very simple. We just need to remove this user key from our local storage, and also make sure that the current user is going to be back null. Okay, so local storage dot remove item user, and also is logged in is false, and the current user is going to be null again. Okay, now inside our actions, we've set up an action in our login.view component. This action was login, so we have to make sure we have this one inside our store as well. So login is going to get the context, and the context is just this store. So we're going to do context.commit, and we're going to commit the login mutation. Now I wanted to show you both ways of doing also commit and dispatch. In this case, you could use either one of those. Okay, so in this case we're going to commit a login success, and this commit is going to trigger a mutation inside our store, and we're going to update our state. In the dispatch option, we're dispatching an action called login, and what this login action does is the same thing. We're going to commit an action, a mutation called login, and we are setting some values in our state. Okay, the only valid reason to use actions over mutations in your store is to trigger an action that is asynchronic. Okay, so if you need to fetch customers, if you need to post something to the database, if you need to do any AJAX calls to your API, you will create an action, and this action, once it's resolved, is going to is going to commit a mutation to your store. Okay, the next step is going to be to go to our routes and make another route for login. Okay, so let's add another one in here. The path is going to be login, and the component is going to be the login component we've just created. So let's make sure we are importing this one from auth login. Okay, and I forgot to trigger the npm run watch command. Okay, and I can see that we forgot to change the name here from home to login. Okay, all the rest is working great. And I would like to also make sure that the user cannot get to our home page without being logged in. So I'm going to create another key in here called meta, and this object we can put whatever we want in here, and we can fetch this object with a function on our router called before each. We're going to create this function, and before each route is triggered, we can check if the route the user is intending to go to is meeting our limitations in this meta object. Okay, so my limitation here is going to be requires auth, and this is going to be equal to true. Okay, and okay, now I can go into my app.js, and somewhere in here I'm going to do router.before each, and this function will get another function with 3 parameters: to, from, and next. Okay, so to is the route the user is asking to go to, and from is the route we just came from. And next is a callback function we can invoke whenever we want to just stop this before each function and simply move to the route. Okay, so my first step here is to fetch the requires auth key inside our meta object we have in our route, so this one. Let's create a const requires auth, and it's going to be equal to to.matched.sum record.meta.requires auth. Okay, next step is to grab the current user from the state. So we need to make sure that we have a user, because if we don't have a user and this route requires auth, we can just send him to the login page. And if we are going to log in and we have a current user, we can send him to the home page. And that's basically all the logic we need in here. So current user is going to be equal to store.state.current user. And the reason we have access to this one is because the store is defined right here. Now, if this route requires auth and we're not logged in, I would like to invoke the next function and go to the login page. Else, if the path we're going to is equal to login, but we're already authenticated, I would like to take the user to the home page. And in any other case, I just don't care, and I'm going to send him to the home page. Okay, let's see if we can see something in our browser. Let's go to vue.spa.dev and let's see what happened. User is not defined. Let's see. Go to our store, and I have user in here, maybe inside my auth. Oh, okay, I'm checking the wrong variable in here. So user string. Let's refresh now. We failed to convert exception to string. Okay, I think it's something in our VueRouter. Okay, I think I know what the problem is. The final next shouldn't take us to the home page. Should be generic. Let's try now, and voila, we have the login page. Let's try login. So test@gmail.com. Okay, I think I know what the problem is. Login.vue. We've made the authenticate method, but we didn't do the form on submit.prevent. And then we are calling authenticate. Let's try now. Let's do login and test@gmail.com. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Nothing happened. Let's see, in our login, we're calling login. Let's go into this function and we're calling something other than Axios. Let's try now. The reason that I'm going to log in and refresh and that I don't see the actual application is because Laravel is trying to match this route inside our routes/web.php file, and we don't have a route for that. So we keep getting back this, sorry, the page doesn't exist, 404. What we can do to override this one is making sure that we are getting any route in here. And there is a nice tweak in here. We can do something like any is basically everything. Now let's try to refresh and we get our application. Great. Let's do test@gmail.com. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Log in. And voila, we're logged in. Okay, that was it for this episode. In the next one, we're going to fix our navigation. We are going to make sure that once we have a logged in user, we get his name over here and we can click to log out. And if he is logged out, we can see a login and registration links. We're going to add another link for our customers. And I think we can even complete our customers' work because we don't have too much to do over there. And that was it. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.